She laughed in front of our friends, showing off my anniversary gift and calling it a pathetic attempt to keep her. Everyone chuckled, someone even clapped. I stayed silent. No one expected that I would be the one to expose her and her lover to everyone. But I was already preparing the evidence. Hi friends, if you enjoy this kind of story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps make more content. That evening, we were sitting in the living room at a friend's house. It was an ordinary Saturday dinner. The smell of roasted chicken, soft music in the background, clinking glasses. Everyone laughed, discussed vacations and the latest news. I sat in an armchair, listening, answering briefly, and no one noticed how tightly I was holding my glass to keep my hands from shaking. I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. Jennifer, my wife, shone across from me. She deliberately ignored me, joked with the neighbors, acting as if her husband was just a shadow. When someone mentioned anniversaries, she suddenly pulled out the pendant I had given her the week before. She waved it in the air, showed it to everyone, and with a laugh said, "This is how men think they can fix serious problems with a cheap trinket." Laughter rolled through the room. Someone whistled. Someone clapped. I pretended to smile, but inside it burned. I noticed she kept her phone close at all times. Every time the screen lit up, she turned it away from me. That evening, a call came through, loud enough for everyone to hear, but she ignored it. Later, I glimpsed the name on the screen, Michael. She quickly slipped the phone into her purse as if nothing had happened. I acted like I hadn't noticed, kept nodding along to other people's conversations. But that was the final straw. Not the laughter, not the mockery of my gift, but the fact that she didn't even bother to cover her tracks. I stayed silent. Not a single word of reproach, not a single scene. I knew any outburst would only make me look weak. But I also knew silence can be louder than any scream. And in that silence, I began to build a plan. Every glance she gave her phone, every message, every small clue. They all became pieces of a larger picture I was determined to complete. That night, I didn't argue with her. When everyone left, she calmly went to bed without even noticing my cold stare. I remained downstairs at the table and wrote the first line in a notebook. Michael. Number. Time of call. That was the beginning. Sometimes revenge doesn't start with a scream. It starts with a quiet note in a notebook. The following days passed like any other on the surface, but beneath that calm mask every second was a calculation. I woke up early, made coffee, kissed Jennifer on the cheek before she left for work, and went about my day as if nothing had changed. She looked me in the eyes, she even smiled sometimes, and I matched her expressions without hesitation. But each time she reached for her phone and tilted it away from me, I remembered that name flashing across the screen. Michael. That name became the silent companion in every room of our house. I started with the simplest step. At night, when she fell asleep, I memorized the lock pattern on her phone. It wasn't difficult. I had lived with her long enough to know her habits, her rhythm, the way her fingers moved. Within a week, I was inside. Messages, photos, short calls at odd hours. All of it hidden behind the innocent mask she wore around me. I copied everything into an encrypted folder on my laptop. I didn't confront her. I didn't sigh or slam doors. I only saved and cataloged. Each message was dated, each picture labeled. It was like laying bricks one by one, building the walls of a house no one else could see. She often claimed she had late meetings or that she needed to stop by the gym for extra training sessions. I encouraged her, pretended to be supportive, told her she deserved time for herself. But instead of sitting at home, I began following from a distance. My truck was old but reliable, and with a baseball cap and tinted windows, I became invisible in the flow of traffic. Twice I watched her meet him outside a small cafe on the edge of town. They laughed the way we used to laugh years ago. She leaned across the table, her hand brushing his arm. He wasn't a stranger. He looked like a man who believed the world owed him something. Clean-cut, expensive watch, the kind of smile that sells trust but hides calculation. I took pictures through the windshield, zoomed in just enough to capture faces and gestures. When I returned home, she kissed me on the cheek and asked about my day. unaware that her betrayal was already preserved in digital frames. The hardest part was the silence. Every instinct in me wanted to confront her, to shout, to demand answers. But I had learned the value of patience. Silence gave me power. Silence gave me time to see the full picture. One night, after she fell asleep with the phone clutched in her hand, I gently slid it free. My heart pounded as if I were committing a crime in my own home. I opened her messages again, but this time I searched deeper. Hidden apps, disguised names, conversations filled with coded phrases. They thought they were clever, but patterns always reveal themselves. Lunch with a friend was never lunch. Late workout was never about exercise. Copied it all. Still, evidence was not enough for me. I needed to understand the man himself. Who was Michael? Where did he come from? Why did he think he could step into my life and tear it apart without consequence? I reached out to an old acquaintance, a man who had worked in security before starting his own discreet investigative business. His name was Victor, and though we hadn't spoken in years, he listened carefully as I explained. He asked for 3 weeks, no more, no less. I agreed. In those weeks, I maintained my role as the quiet husband. I made sure dinner was on the table, bills were paid, and conversations stayed light. Jennifer joked that I had become calmer lately, that maybe age was finally softening me. I smiled, nodded, and tucked away the bitterness that wanted to spill out. She had no idea that every day I checked my encrypted folder, adding new files, organizing them by date and location, layering proof upon proof until the truth was undeniable. By the end of the second week, Victor contacted me. He wanted to meet in person. We sat in his office, blinds half drawn, the hum of a small fan filling the silence. He inserted a flash drive into his computer and pulled up photos. Jennifer stepping into a hotel lobby, Michael already waiting inside. The two of them leaving hours later, close enough that they could have been one shadow. Then another sequence. The gym parking lot, her slipping into his car, her wedding ring missing from her hand. My jaw clenched, but I said nothing. Victor studied me, waiting for an explosion that never came. Instead, I asked him to continue. What struck me most was not just Jennifer's betrayal but Michael's pattern. Victor had followed him further and discovered that Jennifer was not the only one. There were other women, married women. Each interaction followed the same rhythm. A casual meeting at the gym or a cafe, then late-night calls, then secret hotel rooms. Victor counted at least 4 different women in less than 10 days. For homes fractured, for husbands kept in the dark. My pain suddenly felt less isolated. I wasn't just betrayed. I was one of many. That realization didn't lessen the weight, it sharpened it. I drove home that evening with the flash drive in my pocket. When Jennifer asked about my day, I told her work had been exhausting and went upstairs. In my office, I loaded the images onto my computer, arranged them in folders, and backed them up on a secure drive. I stared at one picture longer than the others. Her leaning against Michael's shoulder, smiling in a way she hadn't smiled at me in years. My pulse slowed. The anger was there, deep and simmering, but colder now, sharper, almost surgical. She believed she was safe in her lies. He believed he was untouchable in his charm. But I was building something neither of them could see, something far more dangerous than rage. That night, I lay in bed beside her, listening to her steady breathing. She turned in her sleep and rested her arm across my chest, a gesture she probably thought still meant something. I stared at the ceiling, wide awake, and knew I was no longer the man she thought she could deceive. I was no longer the husband waiting for scraps of attention. I had crossed into a different kind of silence, one that held weight, one that could break walls. She slept peacefully, but I was awake, and I was writing the next chapter in my mind. The next stage of my silence became a discipline. I rose each day as though nothing was happening, shaved, ate breakfast, and went to work while Jennifer followed her usual schedule. To the world around us, we were still a couple who had simply grown quieter over the years, but inside my head a storm gathered. I no longer looked at her with sadness or confusion. Instead, I studied her as if she were a puzzle, analyzing every word, every glance, every small lie. She believed her game was clever, that she could erase calls, clear messages, hide photos, but what she never understood was that nothing digital ever truly disappears. I was already several steps ahead of her. By now my folders were overflowing. Each date had its own section. Each picture was labeled with time and location. There were screenshots of messages where she wrote how much she needed his strength, or how this was what she had been missing for years. I didn't flinch as I read them. I copied them, archived them, made sure they were impossible to erase. The more evidence I gathered, the calmer I became, because I knew the truth was no longer a suspicion. It was a weapon waiting for the right moment. But the story wasn't only about me anymore. Victor kept digging, and what he found reshaped everything. Michael wasn't simply reckless. He was systematic. There was a script to his seduction, lines repeated to each woman, promises recycled, compliments copied word for word. He wasn't a lover. He was a predator disguised as a companion, feeding on the weaknesses of marriages that were already bruised. For women became 6, then 8. Each one married, each one convinced she was special. Some of their husbands I knew by name, men I had shaken hands with at community events or seen at the hardware store. The thought that they too were living in the same silence I was enduring lit a fire in me. I couldn't allow myself to collapse under the weight of betrayal. I had to think bigger. One evening I stopped at a local bar and by chance ran into Alan, a man I had once built a patio for. We talked about old projects, about the economy, about trivial things, and then casually I mentioned the gym. His expression shifted ever so slightly, a tightening around the eyes, a hesitation before he answered. He said his wife had recently become obsessed with her workouts, gone for hours at a time, returning flushed and distant. I nodded, offered nothing, but later that night I drove to his house and showed him a single photo. His wife in Michael's car, laughing like a teenager. Alan's face drained of color. He stared at it in silence, then asked me how long I had known. I told him the truth. Long enough. He confessed that he had suspected something, but he hadn't had the courage to confirm it. Now he had confirmation, and it cut him in half. I didn't tell him my whole story. I simply told him this wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. He understood. Within days, more names surfaced. Another husband, then another. I met them quietly in coffee shops, in the corners of parking lots, in my office after hours. Each time I opened my laptop and showed them the files, the reaction was the same. Shock, disbelief, then a heavy silence as the truth settled. I spoke little. I didn't need to. The pictures spoke louder than anything I could have said. Some of them cried, some swore, some simply sat with their heads in their hands. But in each case, I repeated the same phrase I had come to believe with all my heart. The pain is the same, only what we choose to do with it changes. My own house became an odd stage play. Jennifer continued as though life was normal. She asked me about work, suggested we plan a vacation, even hinted at trading in the car for something newer. I agreed to everything with a smile. She had no idea that her every movement was being catalogued. Her every word weighed. When she laughed on the phone late at night, I noted the time. When she said she was meeting friends but I knew exactly where she was going, I saved the location. The silence between us grew, but she mistook it for distance, maybe even for apathy. She had no idea it was the calm before a storm she could never imagine. The idea of confrontation in private lost all appeal to me. It would give her a chance to deny, to twist, to cry, to manipulate. I wanted something cleaner, something that would leave no room for excuses. I wanted the truth to reveal itself in a way that no one could escape. The question became not whether to expose, but how. Timing was everything, and timing had to be perfect. Victor provided me with access to more of Michael's digital footprint. Fake accounts, hidden messages, secret reservations at motels outside the city, even a small apartment rented under another name that he used exclusively for his affairs. The man believed he was untouchable. But nothing is untouchable when someone is patient enough to collect every detail. The deeper I went, the more meticulous I became. I cross-referenced names, dates, gym schedules. I mapped it like a blueprint, a structure where every beam was a lie and every wall another betrayal. And I realized something else. This wasn't just about me being cheated on. This was about a man who made a game out of destroying families. I could no longer think only of my marriage. The scale of his manipulation demanded something larger than personal revenge. I remember one Saturday evening when Jennifer was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She hummed to herself as if nothing in the world was wrong. I stood in the doorway watching her. She turned, smiled, and asked if I wanted wine with the meal. I nodded, sat at the table, and listened to her talk about how busy she had been. All the while I knew that earlier that very day she had been with him. The contrast was almost unbearable, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I stored that moment deep inside me as fuel. The duality of her pretending to be the wife while living a double life gave me all the confirmation I needed that the plan I was building was not only justified, it was necessary. Late that night, after she went to bed, I returned to my office. I laid out everything on the desk: photos, screenshots, recordings. I organized them into a sequence, almost like chapters in a story that would be told not with words, but with undeniable images and facts. Each click of the mouse, each file placed in order, brought me closer to something final. I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't angry in the way I had been at the start. I was calm, steady, deliberate. My silence was no longer a shield. It had become a weapon. The day of reckoning did not announce itself with thunder. It came quietly, like every other morning. I brewed coffee, read the newspaper, nodded when Jennifer kissed me on the cheek before she left. She thought I was heading to the job site early, but instead I drove to meet the men who now shared my burden. There were 5 of us gathered in a dim back room of a diner on the outskirts of town. Each of us carried the same hollow expression, the same knowledge that our lives had been dismantled piece by the same man. I opened my laptop and laid out the sequence. Faces appeared on the screen, laughter caught on camera, hotel entrances, phone records. Silence filled the room as each husband recognized his wife. No one raised his voice. No one needed to. What we shared was heavier than rage. When the last image faded, I looked at them and said only this: the pain is ours, but the fall will be his. Heads nodded. No more words were necessary. From that day forward, the preparation took on a sharper edge. With Victor's help, I secured a way into the upcoming regional fitness competition. Michael was the face of the event, his image plastered on posters, videos, banners. Sponsors praised him, the gym community idolized him. He was about to step onto a larger stage than ever before, and I had chosen that very stage to be the place of truth. In the weeks leading up to the event, Jennifer buzzed with excitement. She talked about how proud the whole gym was of Michael, how everyone was certain he would take the top prize. I nodded along, silent, supportive, giving no hint that I had already ensured his victory would never happen. She thought I was distant because of work. She never realized that every time she praised him, she was laying the groundwork for her own humiliation. On the morning of the championship, the gym was transformed into an arena. Families filled the seats, local reporters set up their cameras, and a giant screen towered behind the platform. I arrived early, blending into the crowd with a plain cap and an expressionless face. The other husbands were there too, scattered across the bleachers, each in his own corner. We did not acknowledge one another. Our pact was silent but unbreakable. Jennifer sat near the front, her phone in hand, her smile bright. She waved to friends, laughed, and looked every bit the supportive wife. She had no idea that the ground beneath her was about to crumble. The lights dimmed, the announcer's voice boomed, and Michael strode onto the floor with the arrogance of a man who believed the world belonged to him. The crowd erupted in applause. He lifted his arms, pointed to the ceiling, soaked in the attention. The music swelled and the screen behind him flickered to life, showing highlights of his career, clips of his training, motivational quotes. He smiled wider, feeding off the energy. And then, in a heartbeat, everything shifted. The screen went black. A hush fell over the crowd. At first they thought it was a glitch. 2 seconds passed. Then the first image appeared. Michael and Jennifer, kissing in a parking lot, date stamped in the corner. The silence deepened. Another video played, them in a restaurant, hands intertwined across the table. A caption followed, extramarital affair with Jennifer, married 15 years. Gasps rippled through the audience. Murmurs spread. Then came another photo, another caption. Melissa, wife of Alan. Then Lisa, wife of David. One by one, the names and faces filled the screen, each image undeniable. Wives caught in embraces. Smiles meant for secrecy, now magnified for everyone to see. The crowd erupted into chaos. Shouts, cries, disbelief. Some people stood, pointing, others covered their mouths. The husbands I had met sat stone-faced, their wives' faces frozen in horror beside them. Jennifer's phone slipped from her hand. Her smile vanished as she stared at the screen, pale and trembling. She turned instinctively to find me, and when her eyes finally caught mine across the gym, I did not look away. I held her gaze with a coldness she had never seen before. On the floor, Michael stood frozen, his arrogance drained from his face. He shouted something to the organizers, but they had no control anymore. The video was running on a timer, uninterruptible. More images rolled, more women revealed, more lies exposed. The crowd turned from shock to outrage. Sponsors pulled down banners, families rushed toward the exits, and men vaulted over barriers. Michael tried to flee, but he was surrounded. Some shouted at him, others shoved him. Chaos spread until security intervened, dragging him away, battered, humiliated. His career finished before the cameras that had once worshipped him. I did not move. I stayed in my seat, watching the ruin unfold. Jennifer sat just a few rows away, her hands covering her face, her body shaking. She looked again for me, desperate, pleading with her eyes for something, anything. But I gave her nothing. No words, no gestures, only silence. When it was over and the crowd dispersed, I walked out through a side door without glancing back. That was the cleanest cut I could give her. When she returned home that night, I was waiting at the kitchen table. Her suitcase was packed by the door. A folder with her documents sat neatly on the table. She collapsed onto her knees, begging me to listen, crying that it had all been a mistake, that it started as nothing and spiraled out of control. She said all the women had been caught up in some foolish game, that they had told each other it was harmless. She swore I was still the love of her life. I let her speak until the words dissolved into sobs. Then I stood, placed the folder in her suitcase, and told her calmly that I forgave her because I needed peace for myself. But she was no longer my wife. I opened the door and waited. She cried harder, begged again, but eventually she picked up the suitcase and walked out. The divorce came quickly. I made no demands, asked for no fights. I signed the papers, closed the chapter, and returned to my work. People in town whispered about the scandal for weeks, then months, but eventually the noise faded. What remained was the quiet respect I earned for never shouting, never lowering myself, only exposing the truth with clarity. I sold our old house and built a smaller one with my own hands, where silence became my ally instead of my prison. In time, I found companionship again, not as a cure, but as proof that trust could still exist. Jennifer lived in a small apartment, burdened by the weight of her choices. Michael vanished into obscurity, his name now a warning rather than a boast. For me, life resumed its steady rhythm. The pain had been real, but dignity endured longer. And that is what I learned. Sometimes silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is the sharpest blade. If you watch this story to the end, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your support means everything.